Om Jnanatamarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. We are continuing with our Narada Bhakti Sutras. This is the 8th session, and we will continue until we're finished with the entire Narada Bhakti Sutras. And if you'll remember last time, which was a month ago, we went through quite a few verses establishing essentially the inefficacy of jnana alone. That is, how simply taking an intellectual approach to trying to know God, to know the Absolute, to achieve liberation, etc., is insufficient. And we went very, very deeply into this. And that was one theme that ended when we ended that class. Well, now we're going to be starting with chapter 3 and starting another theme. And as you will remember, we talked about this, how the Narada Bhakti Sutras, and actually much of the sutra literature, will have themes within any of the specific texts that we're talking about. Whether it's the Brahma Sutras, whether it's the Yoga Sutras, there are little themes that will consist of several verses. Well, we're about to start another one. So again, we're starting with chapter 3, and this is the 34th total verse. All right, so I will read this and comment on each of these verses. So first, verse 34. The great acharyas have described the spiritual disciplines or sadhanas of devotional consciousness, bhakti. All right. Now, as we have seen in the past with so many of these verses, this is a deceptively simple sounding verse, isn't it? In fact, it doesn't really even seem to be saying much. And yet, there's a lot that's here. Let's go through this a little bit. First of all, there is what I would call an epistemological component here. In other words, how is it that we know truth? Well, Narada is explaining to us here. The way that we know truth is not just speculation, not just we saw a good Facebook post and that's the truth, etc., etc. A million other ways that we can think of how we can derive truth. But what does he say? The great acharyas have described. So this is one thing that's of importance, is that we've seen with the Narada Bhakti Sutras again and again that there is an emphasis on the teachings of the acharyas, his own teachings, but then he will quote people again and again. If you don't remember this, then just look at the previous videos that we have up, because all the videos up until this very class we have shared with everyone. Refresh your memory, go through the previous verses, and you'll see that he quotes different acharyas, different rishis, different gurus again and again as authorities. So this is how we know something. Now with this specific verse, what he's talking about is the nature of sadhana, the nature of practice. And how is it that we know the nature of practice? Well, according to Narada, we know this too, through the previous acharyas. Now, what does that mean, that we understand practice, that the great acharyas have described practice or spiritual discipline, sadhana? What does this mean exactly? Does it mean merely a verbal description? Because again, looking at this verse with just a cursory glance, we would think that that's what he's talking about, simply a description, simply, let's say, a revealing of sadhanas. He certainly is talking about that, but he's talking about something much more. How is it that we learn sadhanas from the guru, from the acharya? Well, certainly there has to be description. You know, when you're learning anything, there has to be some sort of valid description where the person is explaining the science of such and such, how something is done, what is the procedure, etc. But more than this, it is through the example of the guru, of the acharya. This is what's unstated here, but what's understood. Because you'll see, even in the Sanskrit, he uses the word acharya. You see, he doesn't say guru, he doesn't say some other word. He uses the word acharya. And acharya has a very specific meaning. It means a spiritual preceptor, yes, but more, and many acharyas themselves have explained this, including Prabhupada. An acharya is an individual who teaches by personal example, you see. So thus, it is of significance that he uses this specific word, acharya. This is an individual who certainly instructs and has the ability to instruct like no other. In fact, that's his primary duty, is to instruct as a lineage holder. He is representing the truth and passing that truth on to others. But more, it is in observing the acharya and the sadhanas that the acharya does that we then learn what it means to practice these sadhanas. All right? So now with this understanding, let's look at this verse one more time. Let's read this again. The great acharyas have described the spiritual disciplines or sadhanas of devotional consciousness, bhakti. All right? So this is a perfect way to begin this section, where now he's going to talk about several of these sadhanas and the significance of sadhanas. First, you have to establish, from where am I deriving my knowledge? Okay? When you're having any sort of philosophical discourse, that's the first thing you have to say. You can't just say such and such is the truth. You have to say, well, first of all, before I say such and such is the truth, how do I know? Where am I getting my information? You see? You know, when you go to a doctor because you have a problem, you don't just go to anyone's office, not knowing who the person is, and you say, all right, I'm here, please do an operation on me. You first kind of glance over and you make sure that they have a diploma on their wall. And from where? From where is very important. So this is kind of what this is doing. It's establishing authority. All right. Let's go on now to the next verse, which is 35. Now talking about the nature of sadhana itself. The sadhaka. Sadhaka is a person who does sadhana. Very simple. The sadhaka develops devotional consciousness by renunciation of the objects of the senses and by rejecting the association of unspiritual people. All right? Now, first, before we even dive into this verse, there's something I want to say about the importance of sadhana itself. Because we understand, as practitioners of yoga spirituality, as practitioners of the Vedic way, as spiritual practitioners, just even in general, the most general of senses, that, as we talked about the last time, it's not enough merely to understand something intellectually. Rather, we have to have the ability to put it into practice. Without actual practice, it's kind of like looking at a beautiful painting of a beautiful landscape somewhere in Hawaii or the Fiji Islands or something. But simply looking at that painting, you're not going to experience how wonderful it would be to be in such a place. It is when we do sadhana that we go from merely looking at, let's say, a beautiful painting of Fiji or someplace in the Pacific like this, a beautiful, beautiful place, to actually being there. There's a tremendous difference between simply looking at a painting and actually being there and experiencing, breathing in that beautiful ocean air and feeling the beach underneath our feet, etc., seeing all the beauty around us. Well, in the same way, sadhana is what brings spirituality to life. Simply thinking about spirituality, thinking about deep thoughts, etc., is helpful to sadhana. But ultimately, it's in the sitting down and doing actual spiritual practices that then spirituality comes to life for us. It is at that point that we are beginning to truly experience what it means to know God. You see, if I were to ask people here, oh, does anyone here know Barack Obama? Probably everyone would raise their hand, like, oh, thinking that I'm asking, oh, have you heard of him? And everyone, of course, would raise their hand. Oh, yes, I know Barack Obama, yeah. Oh, really? So you met him? Oh, well, no. No, I haven't actually met him. What does it mean to actually know? It means, again, to have that level of intimacy. So in the same way with sadhana, if we were to say, oh, do you know God? Do you know what God is? Oh, a lot of people, especially my students now, can answer that. And they can say, oh, yes, I know what God is. God is such and such. And you'll give a very nice definition. But then again, if I qualify my question and say, no, I don't mean just a definition. I mean, do you know God? Are you experiencing God? Do you know God intimately? Well, then hands would maybe start to go down. See, a radical difference. Sadhana is everything. It's of crucial importance. I have a wonderful student in Austin who, like some of my students, I won't obviously give away who this person is, doesn't matter. But I have a wonderful student who, like some of my students, sometimes have some difficulty with their sadhana. And she was having difficulty, and she had actually stopped for some time. And she told me and other people a very interesting story. She actually said this publicly, so she said this in front of several people. She said how she was speaking to her husband at one point, and keep this in mind, her husband is an agnostic, almost an atheist, no interest in spirituality. But she was speaking to him about how she was having difficulty doing her sadhana, and as a result, she didn't know what to do, and she asked his opinion, his advice, this person who's an atheist. And she said, oh, what should I do? Should I just give this up, or should I keep doing it? And this is what he said to her. He said, well, I don't do any sadhana, I don't do meditation, I barely even believe in a God. But I can tell you this, you are better when you do your sadhana. You are a better person. I can tell you that as your husband. And that so affected her that she began doing her sadhana again. Very, very important that we see that when we are doing our sadhana, we are better people. Everything is better for us. We are more peaceful. Our realization is deeper and more vibrant. It's something that's more real, etc. So this is why this section here is very important, stressing the importance of sadhana and what sadhana is. So just to remind people, because that was a little aside, let me read this again, verse 35 to everyone, and then comment on this. The sadhaka, the person who does sadhana, develops bhakti, devotional consciousness, by renunciation of the objects of the senses and by rejecting the association of unspiritual people. So two negative activities here. Two negative activities. First of all, the renunciation of the objects of the senses. And this is something that we've talked about before, because with so many of these concepts, because they are nuanced, because they are deep concepts, people will often misunderstand them. Renunciation of the objects of the senses. Number one, we know that the objects of the senses themselves are ultimately unreal. We know that our senses are attracted to certain things. We'll see something very attractive. That can be different things for different people. If you don't have a car and you really want a car, you see a nice car and suddenly you're attracted to it. If you're looking for romance, you'll see the opposite sex, you'll see someone and you're attracted. You'll hear certain things, smell certain things. You just ate a great meal, you shouldn't be hungry, you're walking down the street and you smell donuts coming from a donut shop. Suddenly, you're following your nose to that donut shop, even though intellectually you know you don't need the donut, etc. We become slaves to the various objects of our senses. Now, does this make the objects of our senses evil? You see, for some people who take a rather immature approach to spirituality, in their mind they'll say, oh yes, these things are evil. Yes, I should avoid all the objects of the senses and just kind of live in such a way where nothing exists for me, etc., etc., etc. And I would hope that nobody here has ever attempted something like that for very long. Because, of course, what you'll see is that very quickly you'll just cease to live altogether. The objects of the senses are neither good nor bad. They are there. What is of importance is our attachment to them and why we are attached to them. That's the thing that's of importance. Thus, when Narada here says renunciation of the objects of the senses, this is what he's talking about. Not suddenly now viewing these things that have attracted us as being inherently evil. They're not. How could a donut be evil? I mean, think about it. It's neither good, neither bad. It's simply what it is. It's an object. What, however, leads to our denigration versus our elevation is when every single time we smell a donut, we have so little self-control over ourselves that we have to eat it. Or every time we see someone who we feel is attractive, we have to follow that person home like a stalker, etc., etc. You get the idea. There's nothing inherently evil about that person. We chose to become so infatuated by them to the point where it's beginning to harm us, etc. So this is what Narada is speaking about when he talks about renunciation of the objects of the senses. Not that the senses are bad, but that we have to understand these objects in their proper perspective. That is, appreciate them for what they are, acknowledge them, and unless we have to be engaged with them for some reason, move on. Oh, I'm walking down the street. Oh, wow, those are really good smelling donuts. Acknowledge that, move on. Keep walking. Especially if you know you don't need that donut, etc. So that's the first thing. Second, and by rejecting the association of unspiritual people. Now, this is very important. This is something that is actually crucial. Oh, for decades now, I've had to repeat this to so many people who I have known, who I have met, both serious students of mine as well as people just asking me for advice, who I have seen and they have told me how in their own life they were going through tremendous struggles and challenges, and they would have addictions, they would have bad habits, etc. And I would ask them, who do you associate with? And they will tell me, oh, well, yeah, all my friends, they all take drugs, they all party all the time, they're all materialistic, And I would very bluntly say to them, well, stop associating with them. Oh, what does that mean? Stop being friends with them? Yeah. Yes. Stop being friends with them. Now, this doesn't mean, again, it doesn't mean hate them. It doesn't mean make them your enemy. It doesn't mean that there is something inherently evil with them or who they are. They are Atmans who, right now, at present, are so densely deep in illusion to the point where if you associate with them, it will be bad for you. So, what do? We are meant to choose who we associate with. Now, it's interesting. Intuitively, we understand that this is what we do with sadhana just in general. Do we not choose what it is that we do and not do? We choose to be vegetarian. We choose not to eat meat. We choose to do sadhana. We choose not to avoid sadhana. We choose to read such elevating works as Bhagavad Gita and wonderful Vedic scriptures. We choose not to read pornography, let's say, or bad fiction or something like that. We choose all the time. This is what it means to make progress. This is what it means to make ourselves better people. Well, by extension, should we not also be doing that with who we associate with? Very simply, in the same way that we make choices in life, and if we are strong enough internally, we have the ability to make those choices as if we have the most sharp sword imaginable. And we say, I will not do this because I recognize it's harming me. It's harming my health. It's harming me mentally, emotionally, etc. I will not do that. I will instead do this. Well, with the same sharp sword, we are to choose who we are associating with. And this is where it becomes a discipline. It doesn't matter how close they are to us. It doesn't matter if, but I've known this guy's been my buddy for 5 years. Yeah, and every time I'm with him, all he wants to talk about is sports, and he wants to try to drag me to bars all the time for all those 5 years. Well, this is a buddy that is not a buddy. This is someone who you associate with for whatever purpose you are, because he's entertaining, because he's fun, because he has a good sense of humor, but he also is a destructive element in your life. So we need to, at this point, choose. All right, do I really need this person in my life, especially since every time I'm with him, he tries to drag me into some activity that I know ultimately is just going to harm me? Well, at that point, we make that choice that, no, I will no longer associate with this person. Conversely, of course, this is stating this in the negative. Conversely, of course, what do we do? Does this mean that we are to be friendless? Well, we're to be friendless if every single friend in existence is bad, but that's not the case. There are good people in the world. These are the people who we choose to associate with. Those individuals who, when we are in their presence, when we're with them, and it doesn't have to be always a serious situation, even when we're just hanging out with them, and just, having fun, being at a cafe, taking a walk, doing something nice. Every time we are with them, we feel elevated. We feel wonderful. We feel intellectually stimulated. We feel love. We feel as if I'm with somebody who really cares about me and doesn't just want to drag me to a bar, but wants to listen to me when I have problems, and someone who I don't mind listening to this person when he has something to share with me, and on and on. We want positive association such that when I'm done being with this person and we finally part ways, he goes home, I go home, I feel as if my soul has taken a shower. I feel as if my soul has taken a bath. I feel as if I was in the presence of someone who was a being of light. Imagine being surrounded by such people. Now, of course, whenever we get together, we have such association. Look around you. We're describing every person in this room and the people who couldn't be here today, and so many others who we know. We all have such people in our life. For some of us, maybe we only have one. Maybe we're very unfortunate. We only have one. Maybe we have a few. Maybe we have an entire Sangha, an entire association of individuals, of dozens, hundreds, thousands of people who we know elevate us and who we can associate with. However many it is, this is what's important. Use that sword of discernment. Use that sword of discernment. And associate only with those individuals who truly are spiritual company. Disassociate from those who are not. All right. So we're still talking about how the sadhaka develops devotional consciousness by, now we go on to verse 36. And what else? And by uninterrupted worship of God. All right. The previous two things were negatives. Now we're talking about a positive. This also is how the sadhaka, the individual who is doing their sadhana, performing spiritual practice in order to progress toward the divine, this is a positive way in which they can do this. Now, what exactly does this mean? Uninterrupted worship of God. What are some other terms for this? Bhakti. Or let's say even in English. God consciousness. Prabhupada's term, Krishna consciousness, which is a wonderful term. Uninterrupted worship of God. In other words, this is what he is saying. The way that we develop bhakti, the way that we progress in our sadhana is by consciously and through our will, choosing at all times to have the divine, to have God in the forefront of our consciousness in such a way that regardless of where we find ourselves, regardless of the time of day, regardless of who or what we are surrounded by, whether we find ourselves in the middle of a busy urban downtown area, whether we find ourselves deep in a forest, whether we find ourselves strolling along our block in front of our house, whether we're inside the house and we're doing things, we're cooking, we're getting ready for the day, we're getting ready to go to bed. At all times, we should have uninterrupted worship of God. Now, what does this mean? Uninterrupted worship of God. When we think of worship, of course, we tend to think of something external. We tend to think of, for example, a puja. We tend to think that, well, what does it mean to worship God? It means that, well, we're thinking of God, or maybe we have a murti of God, and we're kind of in this sort of a posture and offering our obeisances, etc., offering our namaskaras. That certainly is an externalized form of worship. However, that form of worship, interestingly, for the yogi is not primary. For the yogi, and this is something that is known universally throughout Yoga Shastra, throughout the Yoga scriptures and within the context of yoga, but very few people know this. Worship is primarily internal for the yogi. It's primarily internal. In other words, for the yogi at all times, in meditation and even when they are going about their day with their eyes open and not seemingly in meditation, God is there in the forefront. And at all times, they have a reverential, service, worshipable attitude toward the divine. You see, This is even more important than the outward manifestation of worship that we know of as puja or offering obeisances, etc. In fact, so much so that it's actually understood that any externalized form of worship that we are doing is itself only a sadhana to bring ourselves to the point where we are worshiping internally. When we are physically doing puja, the reason why is that is a sadhana to train ourselves such that internally we can be doing puja to God without moving the hands, without even the eyes open, or sometimes with the eyes open. Again, it doesn't matter. But the goal is at all times to be worshiping God. See, again, what are other terms for this? Bhakti, God consciousness, Krishna consciousness. Brahma Vidya, having God always in the forefront of our consciousness. It's interesting. Let me tell people a little secret of mine, actually. You know how we have the bindi, you know? I think I forgot to put one on, but I put one on everyone else today. But you know how we have the bindi, you know, right here. And there are several reasons why that's the case. Yogically, it is also there to represent, but also to help open the Agya Chakra, the third eye, etc. Let me tell you something very interesting. Whenever I have a bindi on, and I have it on a little bit less these days, in the past I used to wear a bindi very, very often. In my mind, every time I had that, I would always think to myself, actually, this is God in the forefront of my consciousness. That was my own little internal sadhana. I would never say that out loud. But you know, often when I would go to a temple or be in a context where the priest would then put the bindi on me, as he would be putting it on me, I would think to myself, actually, this is to remind me that God is here. God is not here or up there. God is here on the forefront of my awareness at all times, as close to me as anything can be. And again, that was just my own little practice to try to remind myself of the fact that God is always there and I am always worshiping God. So try this. Try this at home. Even if you don't physically, you know, put on a bindi, still just think to yourself that where is God? Not there, not here, not other places. God is as close to me as can be, literally right between my eyes on the very forefront of my awareness. It's a very nice practice. So this is the idea of uninterrupted worship of God. Uninterrupted worship of God. What's, you know, oh, we can go on and on about this for a very long time. What is another term for this? Yogic term that Patanjali uses, among other people. Samadhi. Is that what you're going to say? That's all right. Samadhi. Samadhi. Uninterrupted awareness of the transcendent. That is Samadhi. So this also really is what Narada is speaking about here. Being in perfect Samadhi is how we develop bhakti. Let me repeat that. Being in perfect Samadhi is how we develop bhakti. See, often people think of it as the other way around. No, always keep in mind, bhakti is primary. Bhakti is what we are aiming at. Everything else is very simply a servant of bhakti. Even Samadhi is a servant of bhakti. All right. Very good. Let's go on to the next verse, 37. And by hearing and singing about the auspicious qualities of the Lord, even while situated within the world. Okay? So this is another way in which we develop devotional consciousness. This is another sadhana. That is hearing about God, chanting about God, having kirtan. All right? You know, last time we were together, we talked a little bit about the nature of personality and how we have to have personality in order to communicate. Without personality, there is no vehicle, no means for communication. Well, this also is how we communicate. What does it mean to communicate? We hear and we speak. We hear and we speak. So thus, what Narada is speaking about here is communication. We all communicate. Every living being communicates in one way or another. Think of any animal, think of any insect. They communicate with each other. They communicate, their needs in one way or another. Even if they're attacking you, they're communicating, you see. When a lion is attacking you, he's communicating. If a bird is chirping, he's communicating, etc., etc. There's no living being that does not in one way or another communicate. All right, so this is essential to what it means to be personality, is to communicate. Well, what Narada is saying here is that we have the ability to simply communicate in a normative fashion, the way all living beings do, in order to simply express our needs to others. Because why do we communicate, really? At the heart of it is that we're expressing our needs one way or another, even if it's just an emotional need, even if it's just a psychological need, even if we're not literally saying, oh, I need this, still, we're expressing our needs. I have a need to tell you how my day was today, etc. Okay? So this is what it means to be a personality, is to communicate. However, rather than simply communicating our needs in a materialistic, illusioned fashion, what Narada is saying here is we have the ability to take this tool of communication that we have and use it as a sadhana. Use it in such a way that it can reveal God to us. Thus, we have the ability to take these two powerful things that we have. What we hear, because we're all hearing things all the time, right? We choose what we want to hear. Oh, we have different kinds of music that we like, or we'll watch a TV show, or we'll listen to a podcast. We hear all the time. Well, we have the ability to choose to hear those things that will help us to advance spiritually. Okay? As everyone is doing here. What are you doing? You chose to be here so that you could hear something that will help you to advance spiritually. But then, also conversely, of course, we want to, again, communicate. We want to speak. We want to sing. What culture is there in which you don't have music, in which you don't have song of one sort or another? Every culture. Why is this the case? Because, again, it's something inherent to our soul. But if we are going to communicate, if we're going to speak, if we're going to sing, let's try to do that in such a way that we are praising God. That's kirtan. Kirtana. Kirtana is the Sanskrit, what is so often called kirtan. That is what we did a little bit earlier today. Thanks to Premananda, he led us in beautiful, beautiful kirtan, where we are praising God. And in this way, we're not singing just some top 40 hit. We're not just singing some song about romance and heartbreak, etc., like 99% of songs. Instead, what are we doing? We are choosing to communicate our love for God. So this is yet another way in which we can know God. And let's look at the second clause. Even while situated within the world. Even while situated within the world. First, this goes back to a theme that we've talked about quite a bit, about how what it means to be spiritual is not necessarily that you denounce the world and that you live a very unrealistic sort of lifestyle of extreme asceticism in 2016, where if you were to try to lead a life of extreme asceticism, you really would not be able to do so. In fact, it's funny, I remember telling people once in a while who their aspiration was to live what we would call a perfect yogic lifestyle, that is, have a home deep in the forest and just be engaged 24 hours a day and just reading wonderful scriptures and doing meditation and etc., etc. When they would communicate this to me, this is what I would say to them. Yeah, you can do that if you're very rich. If you're very rich, that's easy to do. If you don't need to have a job, if you can buy a home deep in the countryside with like 20 acres of land, and all your food is taken care of, and all your bills are taken care of, etc., etc. When you become rich, yes, please feel free to do that. In the meantime, if you're not going to be able to do that. Even if you quote unquote join an ashram, people who have this fantasy, oh, I'm going to go to India and just live in an ashram and not have any materialistic needs whatsoever. Well, I've lived in ashrams. I'm sorry, I've lived in ashrams for many years, on 3 continents. In America, Europe, and India. If you're going to live in any ashram upon this earth, you better expect to have to work hard. I've never lived in an ashram where you move into the ashram and they say, all right, well, now your duty is just to do nothing but meditate and study and read the scriptures, etc. 24 hours a day. There is no such ashram on this earth. Instead, you have to clean the pots, and you have to clean the ashram, and you have to, etc., 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 do administrative work, etc. So we are meant to be in the world and live a practical lifestyle, live an actual life in such a manner that we are living a life of dignity. We are living a life in which we are growing within the context of others. Others, some of who are in illusion, some of who are not. We are meant to learn from this world because this world is a schoolhouse. This world is not here for nothing. We are in this world because we chose ego. We are in this world because we were put in a place where that place itself is designed to show us vividly what it means to live a life of ego. That is, you will have pain, you will have suffering, you'll have a little happiness too, but also mixed with pain and suffering. And living within the world in a normal context is what we are indeed designed to do. And especially today. See, someone can say, well, what about such and such historic figure who did indeed live in a cave and lived a very ascetic lifestyle? Oh, okay. What was that? I'm sorry, 3,000 years ago you're talking about? 5,000 years ago? When are you speaking of? Imagine living in New York City, where I lived for the first 24 years of my life, and me deciding that I wanted to live an ascetic lifestyle and live in a nice natural setting. What would that mean for me? That would mean moving into Central Park. And eventually the police would chase me out as a vagrant. No, rather what we see again and again in the actual scriptures, not our own speculation, not our own desires, but in the teachings of the greatest individuals who know. That is, the teachings of Krishna, the teachings of rishis, etc. What is the message of the Bhagavad Gita? Arjuna, you see, said to Krishna, oh, I want to renounce everything. Krishna said to Arjuna, you are a fool. You are speaking foolish words, to state it exactly. And not just the Bhagavad Gita, but again and again in so many scriptures, we are taught that the way to, with most efficiency, come to the point of liberation is to live our life in such a way that we fulfill all of our material needs, but also, of course, with spirituality in the forefront of our consciousness. Thus, this is why now Narada himself is saying it in this wonderful verse. Even while situated within the world. This is how we have bhakti. We do our sadhana. Again, this whole section is talking about sadhana. We do our sadhana. We learn from the teachings and examples of the Acharya. We avoid bad company. We associate with good company. You see. Eventually we're going to finish this section today. When we get together next time, the next section is going to be talking about good association. Good Sangha. And it will be an entire section that we will spend the next class talking about in its entirety. We're not going to get to that today, but just to let you know. Good association, very, very important, and having God in the forefront of our consciousness. But what? While situated within the world. All right, let us go on to verse 38. And this, I think, will be the last verse that we'll do today, because again, after that, we'll start this section where Narada will talk about good association. But he begins here. One achieves devotional consciousness primarily through the mercy of great sages or by just the smallest trace of the mercy of God. Okay, so let's talk about this. How does one achieve bhakti, divine consciousness, that which is the goal of all yoga, of all Vedic spirituality, etc.? One achieves this primarily through the mercy of the great sages. All right. Now, what does this mean exactly? Through the mercy of the great sages. Again, the Acharya, the Guru, the individual who in your personal life is your personal guide, your personal mentor, that individual who guides you in your spiritual life, both philosophically, but also as far as practice. But it also means not just exclusively that individual who gave you initiation. You see, there are many kinds of gurus, the primary two of which are what are called the Diksha Guru, with a D, Diksha Guru, and then the Shiksha Guru. The Diksha Guru, Diksha means initiation. That is the individual who gives you initiation. That person always is primarily your guru. That is the person who, when someone asks, oh, who is your guru? That's the person you mention. It is that person in whose parampara you are now taking part in. Okay? But in addition to the Diksha Guru, there is the Shiksha Guru. That is any guru, any individual who has given you shiksha, instruction. Okay? Thus, for myself, for example, I have a Diksha Guru, but then I have many, many Shiksha Gurus. And in fact, in my case, I have two Diksha Gurus, but that's kind of out of the ordinary. I have my primary guru, Yatiraja Acharya, but then I have my other guru who is here, Bhakti Rakshaka Sridhar Swami. They both gave me Diksha. But then I have many, many Shiksha Gurus, many individuals who they didn't necessarily give me formal initiation in one way or another, but they instructed me in one way or another. Prabhupada was one of those. I consider him my Shiksha Guru, even though I never formally met him. I only saw him once. And even that from afar, maybe a few hundred feet far away. And he didn't directly speak to me, but seeing him changed my life. It changed my very existence. Thus, he instructed me. He was a Shiksha Guru. And then in addition to him, I have many other Shiksha Gurus, individuals who, in one way or another, guided me in different ways. So, these are the two primary sorts of gurus or great sages. So when he says the mercy of great sages, he's talking about first, primarily, the Diksha Guru, the person who gives us initiation, but also the Shiksha Gurus in the plural, individuals who teach us, but also the great sages. This means also the great sages of the past. Thus, for example, Ramanuja or Vyasa or Narada, or hundreds and hundreds of other names that we can mention. People who we haven't even met face to face, but still, these are great sages whose instructions have come to us in the form of mercy. Whenever we are reading the scriptures, whenever we're reading the Upanishads or Srimad Bhagavatam or anything like this, and we're reading these instructions of these individuals, this is their mercy upon us. And this is how we have to always see it. When we're reading some great Upanishad and there is a great, great guru who is there and we're reading that person's instructions, we have to think to ourselves, how merciful is this person that, however long ago it was, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 years ago, this person taught this lesson and it was written down in such a way that I now can read this and benefit. That's mercy. Kripa, that's mercy. So, very, very important. And then the second clause, or by just the smallest trace of the mercy of God. And this is how I translate this. It's a very exact translation. The smallest little trace. And what is meant by this? This is the nature of God's mercy, that even the smallest drop of that mercy is enough to give us salvation. You see, that's the nature of God. That with everything that God does, it's effortless. See, other people have to do effort. Even the Acharya has to do effort. Prabhupada had to have two heart attacks coming here to America in order to give his mercy to his eventual disciples. And then another heart attack in 1967, I believe, when he was in New York. Gurus, acharyas, human beings who are great teachers, they have to go through great hardship, often to bestow their mercy upon other people. For God, on the other hand, it's effortless. Doing almost nothing, with just one drop of his mercy, we can know liberation. That is the nature of proximity. That is the nature of upasana. This is what it means to be close to God, such that if we merely are in the presence of God, that alone has the ability to purify our very existence. Think about that. Think about that. Simply being in the presence of the divine, our very existence can be purified and we can know liberation. This is why we seek such proximity, such upasana. And how do we seek such proximity to God? The full circle. Sadhana. Through sadhana. This is why we meditate. I'm going to end this section with these interesting, I hope they're interesting thoughts. Why do we meditate? Why do we do sadhanas? Why do we do any kind of spiritual practice? You see, it's interesting how very often even spirituality can be seen as almost a selfish thing. Oh, I meditate to control my mind so that I can have inner peace, so that I can have inner realization and wisdom. See, me, I, all these, all these pronouns pointing only to me and myself. However, the truth of the matter is this is how we need to begin thinking of this yogically. Why do I do a yoga in the general sense of union with the divine? Why do I meditate? Why do I do sadhanas? Why do I do pranayama? Why do I do even asana? Why do I do any of these techniques of the yoga system, of the ashtanga system? Is it to benefit myself? This is what the bhakta thinks. No! It's not to benefit myself. It is to please God. And thus, as an aside, of course it all benefits me. Of course, you're going to have the benefit. But the mind of the bhakta is very different from the mind of even the typical yogi. You see, even the yogi can still have some sense of me-ness. Me, myself, and I. Whereas for the bhakta, even in the subtlest way, that's gone. And even when they are in meditation and experiencing the bliss of meditation, at no point are they thinking to themselves, except for the most cursory way. Of course, they can't deny that they are benefiting. Of course, they know their mind is becoming clearer with their meditation, they're having more peace, etc. They won't deny that. But in their mind, as they are meditating, they are thinking to themselves, I am meditating so that I can have proximity to my beloved. That's it. And that beloved is God. So absolute selflessness in sadhana is what brings sadhana to its greatest fruition and its greatest meaning. Very good. So let's stop there for right now, because again, starting with 39, we're going to start a new section where Narada is now going to talk about the importance of association, of Satsangha, of good association, associating with individuals who are spiritual, who are good, who are on the path that we are on, individuals who, like ourselves, are meditating, like ourselves, are having realization, individuals who can inspire us, individuals who will cherish anything that we can do to inspire them. You see, how many people do we meet in the real quote-unquote world out there who, if we were to try to inspire them, they would even be thankful, who would even appreciate it, who would even care if we were to try to inspire them spiritually. On the contrary, with most people, if we were to try to talk to them about something truly deep and spiritual, at the most they would be indifferent. Some of them would even say, oh, what, are you trying to convert me to something? They would be suspicious of us. So when we even find individuals who our presence inspires them, we should see that actually as a grace and a mercy upon us. I've said this before. Here I am, the so-called Acharya, sitting on this seat with my students. The fact that you are here is your mercy upon me. It's your grace upon me. The fact that you give me this opportunity to share what little things I can with you. For that I'm grateful. Because I know that if I were to just go out onto any street corner and talk to the typical person about the things we just talked about, they would just look at me like I was crazy. Wouldn't they? So the fact that you go out of your way to come here and you want to know these things, that is your grace upon me. So this is why Satsangha is very, very important. We derive inspiration from others, but also we have the privilege of inspiring others as well. So with that, any questions?
You said we shouldn't associate.
You have to get going.
All right, namaste. Says we should dissociate ourselves from unspiritual people. What if these people are in our family, our wife, our brother, our sister, our mother? We cannot dissociate from them in practice. So what do you recommend?
Yes, very good question, actually. Because on the one hand, yes, we have this teaching that, again, is found many places, not just here. This is found in many of the scriptures, the idea that we should not associate with unspiritual people. We have this on the one hand. On the other hand, we also have many, many places in scriptures where it says that we are to love and take care of and respect our family members. Yes. So we have both of those teachings. So on the one hand, let's say we are married to someone, or we have a sibling or a parent or somebody who otherwise is a good person, but is extremely unspiritual. In fact, practically an atheist, who has no interest in spirituality, to the point where even being in their company is often something that's very discouraging to us spiritually. Well, what are we to do at this point? Because on the one hand, we have these various verses that tell us that we should not associate with such people. On the other hand, we have other verses that say we have to respect our family. Well, at that point, what we are to do is do both. And this is what I mean by do both. We, of course, can't denounce our close family. We can't denounce our parents. We can't denounce our brothers and sisters, especially if they're not evil. They're just not spiritual. They just have no interest in spirituality. What we do is we maintain those relationships, but internally we have bounds that are there. We understand internally that, yes, while it's true, this is someone I'm married to, this is my mother, my father, my brother, my sister, etc. We understand that, we accept that, we live accordingly, but internally we understand that, well, I'm related to this person in this lifetime. I wasn't in a previous lifetime, and I will not be in the future. In other words, we use wisdom and discernment to understand that, yes, in this lifetime, because of that person's karma and my karma, we have come together. However, the way that karma is described is that individuals coming together as friends or family in this material world, it's literally like two ships passing at night, and they just happen to pass each other, but they have no connection to each other. And in this way, we take a spiritual attitude to our relationships with such individuals. The only individuals who we should actually be truly attached to are those individuals who we truly have something of depthful meaning in common with. Those are the people who we are truly attached to. In other words, I'm going to choose the company of my students because my students inspire me to not give up and to continue doing the thing that is of most importance in my life, to teach and to try to help people spiritually. So you do both. You don't denounce your family, you acknowledge them, but internally you have your priorities straight. That's it. Yes, you have your wife. Acknowledge her. Love her. But internally, if she's not spiritual, acknowledge it. And have your priorities. Try to associate especially, use your time to associate especially with those individuals who are spiritual and in whose company you feel wonderful and you grow. Yeah. Good. If anyone has another question, and then we'll end at that point.
I was hoping you could explain in more detail when you were talking about renouncing the senses, just practically in day-to-day life. How does one acknowledge the objects of the senses while also being detached, and how does that look like practically?
Sure. Very simply, we have almost no choice but to acknowledge the fact that they're objects of the senses. In fact, if we didn't have senses, that would be terrible. That would be a horrible existence. We have no choice but to acknowledge the fact that we have senses, the fact that they're objects of senses. However, this is what's of importance. To acknowledge the objects of the senses as objectively and wisely as possible. In other words, to simply accept everything that we see, that we hear, that we smell, that we touch, etc., and just acknowledge them for what they are in a very factual, logical sort of way. Not judging them necessarily unless we have to. Sometimes we do. We have to discern. But understanding that the objects of the senses are objects, that they're neither good nor bad. They're things that I can use in a good or bad way. They're things that may affect me in a good or bad way, but they themselves are neither good nor bad. Yeah, and in this way, just have a very healthy relationship with all of these things. And the truth of the matter is, psychologically even, we do this all the time. Like right now, I'm looking at you, so you are the primary object of my sense of sight. But are you the only one? No. Right now, as I'm looking at you, I see these two arms of the chair. I see my cup. I see the wall. I see other people behind you. I see so many other things. Now, they're all there, and I acknowledge their existence, but my focus is on you. You see? In the same way, we have the ability to do this with everything, to the point where we acknowledge, but without being affected. You see, I'm speaking to you. I acknowledge that this cup is here. Right now, it's not affecting me because I'm focused on you. But I acknowledge it's there. I'm not focused on the fact that I am being levitated right now by the presence of a seat under me. But I acknowledge that, yeah, I'm sitting on a seat. But right now, I don't care. I'm focused on you. You see? So this is what is meant by detachment. This is what is meant by healthy renunciation. So again, a healthy renunciation, where it's not that we're, denouncing in an almost angry sort of way. Oh, I hate all these things. Oh, I don't even want to look at them. No, they don't exist. They don't exist. No. That's what a lot of people think spirituality is, and no, it's not. It's not. It's a healthy acknowledgement of things without being attached to them and without allowing them to adversely affect you. Now, this is all nice when it's said, but what does this mean? How do you do this? Practice. It's one thing to hear this coming from my mouth, entering your ears, but it's a matter of practice. Practice, practice, practice. It comes to the point, like with everything, where we can engage fully in this world, looking at everything, walking through nature, hearing 1,000 birds chirping at us and seeing tens of thousands of leaves and so much diversity around us. We can come to the point where we can do such a thing. We recognize the diversity, we accept it all, but again, in a very healthy, detached sort of way. Does that help a little bit? Good. Very good. All right.